Hello, everyone, and welcome to Trailblazer. As we take a deep dive into Sri Lankan tourism sector. So with us, we have three special guests. We have Mr. Suresh Rajendra, the president for the leisure sector at John Keells Holdings, and also Mr. Henry Fitch, chief executive officer at Teardrop Hotels, and also Mr. Dmitri Cooray, managing director at Jetwing Hotels. So warm welcome to all three of you. And also everyone joining us for the panel discussion. Now, just before we start off, we'd like to, if you have any questions, you can direct them on the chat box for the Capital Alliance account. And yes, as we go on during the session. Now, just to start off with the questions. So, Mr. Suresh, so with improvements in the number of tourist arrivals during the year, what are your expectations in terms of average room rates and occupancy rates for the second half of 2024 and beyond?
Yes, thank you. Nice being here. Second half is looking good. I think we are cautiously confident that we would have an exceptional second half of the year. If we benchmark ourselves against 2018-19, we were running at about 65% of 18-19 figures, but I believe all of us are confident that we'll achieve or maybe even surpass the arrivals during winter, which is actually very positive in the context that China hasn't really kicked off yet, and we're seeing India doing exceptionally well. Their turnaround has been better than expected. Europe has been on par, but Russia has been one of those new finds in a new market, which has really produced for us. So the winter is looking good. I think we would see occupancies, especially in the resorts, reaching potentially in the 80% occupancies. Maybe not so much. The round trips are a little challenged because they have been a bit low, but hopefully they'll pick up as well. So overall, I would see a very, very good winter and it going on to next year as well. Rates-wise too, rates in the resorts again would pick up and maybe even surpass the rates in 18-19. And at the same time, I would think that round trips will pick up too. But the pot rate has gone up substantially, so there's imperative that we have to increase our rates. City is also, thanks to the Indian market, it's picking up on the occupancy. Rates are challenged, and we have a minimum rate that has been introduced in, but we are now dependent on the leisure market, which is quite sensitive to pricing. So we have to watch that cautiously. But overall, I would think that we can be confident of a pretty exceptional second half.
Thank you. So the next question is from Mr. Henry. So with flight connectivity to Sri Lanka increasing and collaborations such as the interline agreement between Emirates and Sri Lankan Airlines aiming to enhance connectivity, how does it benefit both local and international travelers, and what are the potential outcomes?
Okay, thank you. I think obviously the interline agreement, one of the things you mentioned, is obviously a positive, helping reduce transit times through the Middle East, better connectivity just in general, whether that's with Emirates and Sri Lankan, but also other airlines as well, flying in more and more. The Turkish have increased their flights. Cathay due to start from, I think it's February next year, linking us back up to Hong Kong direct, which reduces someone from Hong Kong on Cathay is about a 5-hour flight compared to they probably have to travel 9 hours at the moment if they're going via Singapore or Bangkok. And all of these things will naturally improve things in terms of competition, so hopefully lower fares as time goes on, but also increased traffic into Sri Lanka in general. The airlines obviously only fly here if there's the business there. For a local traveller, people wanting to move outbound from Sri Lanka, as I mentioned, hopefully lower fares. Better connectivity as well means you can actually travel at the times you want to travel rather than having to, be in the middle of the night. If you don't want to be in the middle of the night, there'll be more options available to people. Reduced travel times in general with shorter transits in the Middle East. I think, if you're flying on something like Qatar Air on the way back to the UK, it's a relatively short transit at the moment anyway. But if you're coming from another European destination into or out of Colombo, you might have significant waits in the Middle East, which hopefully this interline agreement will reduce. The benefits from an international traveller point of view and also for Sri Lanka tourism, of course, is that the more airlines that come here, they will be spending their marketing dollars on this route as well. And I think that naturally will increase the brand of Sri Lanka, the destination PR, which I think we all agree has not been good enough over the last year. Having airlines with big budgets spending money on promoting that route into Colombo and out of Colombo is obviously a positive. Also having, again, this isn't just the flights, but if the visas on arrival does materialize for at least the 5 countries, like India, for example, being able to arrive without having pre-booked and paid for a visa, surely the corporate travel will increase, incentives, conferences and events. And that does lead on to more leisure travel as well. People often travel for business and then stay on for an extra few days, go and visit the resorts, the beaches and the hills, not just stay in the city. Just in general, I think the more airlines that come in, obviously the better connections and the lower prices, hopefully, because I think that's one of the issues at the moment is that flight prices around the world have gone up, but I think in and out of Sri Lanka are probably even higher than some other destinations as well. In terms of the potential outcomes, I've already mentioned the PR benefit of that, I think. Obviously, increased tourism means job creation, both in the formal and informal sectors within tourism or linked to tourism. And of course, long run, more infrastructure development, improved facilities at the airport, obviously something people have spoken about within the industry and the country for many years about how the airport needs to be improved, made more efficient, and I think that will happen as well. There was actually a study also, it was a study in the EU actually where it was noted that a 10% increase in level of connectivity increased the GDP of a country by 1%. So actually, if the connectivity increases by 10%, 20%, 30%, which I'm sure it will over the years, then hopefully it has a major impact on the GDP.
Yes, next question for Dmitri. So amidst all these economic difficulties, what policies and incentives have the Sri Lankan government implemented to support the tourism sector?
Thanks. So, well, yes, since 2019 onwards, we have faced so many issues, starting off with the Easter attacks, then COVID, economic crisis. But I think the main thing where the government really supported everyone, hotels, travel agents, and all stakeholders in the industry was the moratorium. Because since April 2019 until January of, they provided that moratorium, which without that, many companies would have not been able to pay their loans and would have had to close down. So that was a significant step. Of course, your interest, everything was accumulated, but by us not having to pay our dues to the bank during those 3 years or 3-4 years, really helped us control our cash flow. That way we could focus on paying our staff, paying the suppliers, and paying and maintaining our cash flows. If we had to pay those, then definitely more than 50-60%, especially the SMEs and so on, would have closed down, and even some of the larger corporates would have struggled if they had large loans. Another thing which the government did at the start was they provided a Saubhagya loan, a working capital for a couple of months. This wasn't a large amount, but at least for the couple of months where we had absolutely zero business during COVID, the couple of months which we were closed down fully, at least those also helped to pay the staff and cover, heads to a certain extent. So these couple of things really assisted. Plus, in addition to the government, even and through the central bank intervention and the private banks, depending on the relationship the individuals had with the respective banks, there was the banks have now allowed us to, they have renegotiated loans and the facilities, so people were able to renegotiate, and if they had to pay back in 5 years, extend it to maybe 10 years, so that way easing the burden. And so the banks also came in by supporting the industry by renegotiating the facilities, and extending the repayment process. So all these, along with the moratorium at the start, definitely help the industry, and of course for the government, especially in today's context, tourism is going to be the main driving force in receiving foreign currency into the industry, so into the country. So as a result, the government is also putting a lot of emphasis on tourism. The one area where the country can really benefit is, like Henry and Suresh mentioned, is the promotion that we require to attract the right clientele, which unfortunately has been delayed. So now I think recently what the promotion bureau said, the advertising campaign might be only pushed out towards middle of next year, which sadly is just keeps on due to bureaucracy. Sometimes there are issues in getting these across, but definitely if we can get these as soon as possible, will only help us attract the right clientele.
Thank you, Dmitri. We're going to come back to you, Ms. Suresh. So what are your thoughts on the minimum room price coming into effect from October and the impact on occupancy rates of city hotels?
Okay, so the MMR, as you said, came only on the 1st of October, so it's a little too early to draw a conclusion on it. But none of us are advocates of any kind of regulations, and we believe markets will behave rationally on the medium term. But however, having said that, the MMR that was introduced in 2011 and went up to about 17 was successful. So I think on the short term, and I believe this is the short term intervention to basically stabilize the market. It's something that we've taken on, but what is important is to monitor to ensure that we are meeting the objectives of why we brought this in. So I believe that there will be enough scrutiny of impacts, because what we really don't want is to lose the capture rates in Colombo, because MMR is only impacted Colombo, and that Colombo starts losing its clientele out, and also that the 5 stars start losing clienteles to the 4s and the 4s, and so on and so forth. So this has to be monitored. But overall, whilst we keep monitoring it, the idea is to ensure that we keep the standard rate up. What we also take into account is that, as I mentioned earlier, today we have our corporate business market is very, very low. Previously, we had a good threshold of a corporate business market who comes to Colombo to stay in Colombo because they have to be in Colombo. Today, it's the MICE market, which could move in the region, and regional rates are quite low and quite competitive, especially in countries like Malaysia and Bangkok and so forth. And also, so that has to get come into consideration. And also, we are kind of dependent on possibly the price-sensitive leisure market, which could either overlook Colombo or move out. So these are things that need to be taken into consideration. So as I said, it's a little too early to draw a conclusion on it. But I think what is important and imperative is to keep us watching the trends to see how it moves, and whether we really are achieving the objectives, and whether they're not. Finally, it's the revenue per available room that you make, right? Is the revenue multiplied by the occupancy. So we got to ensure that we're actually getting a better revenue per available room, and our turnovers coming up. So I would say let's watch it a little more. Let's not draw a conclusion on it right now. It's very, very early, and based on what we see, take whatever decisions that needed to be taken.
Next question is Henry. So how did the higher finance cost impact the hotel sector of the country? And are many hotels focusing on refurbishments as of now, and with the interest rates starting to decline?
Yeah, so I think not just the higher finance costs, but the economic crisis overall obviously has a huge impact on profitability, and there's been an erosion of profitability through those finance costs, through the inflation, through utility bills going on. And I think the whole thing together, the increased operating expenses, has had a massive negative impact, obviously. The second part of the question about investment and refurbishment is, of course, every hotel company has to invest when they have cash. And if your cash is being spent on utility bills rather than improving the quality of the bedrooms, that's a problem. As in terms of teardrop hotels, we've obviously focused on the renovation work or the refurbishment work that we feel is most important. And there have been some things like future projects that we've had to push back because of these finance costs or just a lack of cash flow. We've been focusing on staff salaries rather than new projects, for example. So planned renovations, we've got about 3 projects in the pipeline. Actually, not just the economic crisis, but even COVID. There was one project we had that we were due to start renovation work 4 days after the Easter attacks. Easter attacks happened, and then we put that on hold, and then that project kept on being put on hold and on hold and hold, and now it's gone. It's it's not even a possibility anymore. So 4 years of this, ending with last year, and all of these finance costs and inflation and everything has had a huge impact. Dmitri mentioned earlier, the moratorium was great, but with the moratorium, there's additional loans that we're now having to pay back, which at the time was great that we didn't have to pay the loans at that time, but it's had a big impact now on the ability to again move forward with refurbishments and things like that. Obviously, also, while the tourism sector is not performing as well as maybe it would have been had it not been for all of these issues, banks are less likely to lend. The high interest rates, obviously make it less appealing to be borrowing money. Those interest rates are now coming down, but still, is hospitality, is the tourist sector considered a higher risk by the banks? Well, I think it still is. And from an investor's point of view as well, do you want to be committing to interest rates of double-digit interest rates, not really knowing yet where we're heading next year? I mean, we're pretty bullish about next year and the next 2 or 3 years, and we can be quietly confident about it. But of course,
you never know.
You never know, and the banks obviously look at things a different way to how we see things as well. So.
All right, thank you. So yeah, Dmitri, next one is so the development of the Greater Yard concept and several other sector development ideas were suggested during the previous budget. So are you seeing those plans coming to fruition, and what are the impacts on the tourism sector that you expect from the budget to be announced in November, and the strategies, the benefits from enhancing wildlife tourism and medical tourism?
Yeah, so we'll answer in the first question. Well, most of the things which were in the previous budgets, unfortunately, due to all the problems, never really materialized. But the wildlife, what we know of at present is the wildlife department is in the process of uplifting some of the facilities at Yala. And actually recently they have called for a tender as well. They're planning on opening a restaurant near the ticket office in Yala, which they're looking at somebody to operate it and provide some additional facilities to both foreign and local tourists who come to Yala. So because sometimes some of the guests may not stay very in close proximity to Yala, but might be 45 minutes away, and when they come at 5:36 in the morning, at least for them to have some form of refreshment. So that type of development is happening, but the original plans, I think what they had, unfortunately didn't take place, but definitely there is some movement. To answer your second question regarding the budget, like I mentioned before, in this at this moment of time, tourism is what will play the biggest role in bringing in foreign currency. So, as a country, we believe the government will also look at trying to maximize and give whatever benefits that they could. One thing we hope, like Dmitri mentioned, also a lot of hotels have to look at refurbishing or upgrading some of the products or facilities. So one thing where the government we hope which will look at is giving some duty-free benefits where we can bringing certain material to uplift. So at least that way we can reduce some of the expenses, the costs that we have to bear. So we still don't probably have a great idea on what the budget will bring in, but we expect that they will look at tourism in a very favorable manner, as tourism will be probably the most important industry in the next 18-24 months to make sure Sri Lanka comes out of this foreign currency trouble. And especially wildlife and medical or wellness tourism is really on the rise, especially wellness tourism and medicine. If you look at, as Sri Lanka has been historically known as Ayurveda and local medicine, we have seen continuous growth in this market, as especially from countries in the European region, Japan, and so on, where people lead very stressful lives. They look at getting out of those very busy schedules, and maybe people in the finance industry like that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Capital alliance and so on, which are always stressful jobs, where you need a week or two to de-stress yourself, get your levels down. So we can definitely see this type of business coming in there. If you look at pure medicine or Western medicine, Sri Lanka might not be the biggest attraction because you have countries like Thailand at a very good level, and of course Singapore at a much higher price point. But for Ayurveda and more holistic wellness, where yoga, medication, all of that, Sri Lanka is definitely a very good location, and we have properties which provide that. And we are seeing an increased demand for this type of travel as well. So definitely both the wellness and wildlife tourism, of course, as long as we manage our paths well. That is one thing. Unfortunately, 90% of the wildlife people who come to Sri Lanka will probably only know Yala. Whereas Sri Lanka has so much more. We have Vilpattu, Davalave, Pumana, and to be big parks, but we also have other national parks which also offer great sightings of animals. So we need to see how we can spread the tourists without only focusing on certain destinations.
Yeah, next question is again to Ms. Henry. So with the winter season coming up, are we going to see a noticeable improvement in tourist arrivals? When do you think that we can reach pre-pandemic level arrival numbers and up?
Yeah. Okay. So I'd mentioned before that we are bullish about the future. I would also say that, and it's been mentioned a couple of times already, but I don't think Sri Lanka's done a good enough job of its own PR, destination PR in the last 12 months, if not longer. And I think it's put us probably behind, behind where we should be. We're definitely up on last year, but if we're looking at this sort of upcoming winter season. But from a teardrop point of view, we were running last year round about, from the high season, December through March, we were sort of running probably on average around 40%. We budgeted 6 months ago for this Christmas season to be up around 70 or 80%, but I think we're going to be more, probably closer to around 55. Suresh mentioned that, you know, the round tour business is not, I don't think is there maybe as much as the resort business, where people come and go and spend a week or 2 weeks in a beach resort. And I think for the high end or the you know, the more expensive hotels also, there is some high end business coming in, but it's not as big as it used to be. It will definitely change, and I think also what's happened is that our the booking period has also shortened. So, you know, probably pre-pandemic we were looking at 6 to 12 months as a booking window prior to arrival. Now it's about 3 months. So there's still, I still have hope that we'll be beating this 55% that I mentioned, but I think it's not as good as it should be, and I think this is the same for a lot of the boutique hotel segment. We were talking beforehand as well. It's not just boutique hotels. It's maybe the higher end and maybe the slightly more unusual destinations as well. Whereas I think places, you know, around the Cultural Triangle, Yala, the classic beach destinations, even the East Coast this year has done very well, I think. So, and that actually provides a lot of confidence that if the East Coast have done well in this, in the West Coast's off season, then hopefully the West Coast will do well over the Christmas and New Year period as well. One thing I think that we need to be slightly concerned about is the optics of the Sri Lanka tourism's numbers, because, you know, they're very proud of the fact that there are 100,000 visitors arrivals in a month over the, you know, roughly over the first 7 months of the year, and you know that's great, and it's stepping stones to bigger numbers. But the problem is that a large portion of that is people tick on the arrivals card visiting family and friends. Now, this is particularly, you know, from countries where there's a large Sri Lankan community they're coming back to visit relatives, probably because they haven't been able to or didn't want to last year and weren't able to in the years prior to that. So they're coming in as tourists, but obviously they're not. They might be spending money in bars and restaurants and the occasional trip to places around the country, but they're also probably a lot of them staying with their family. And in the case of something like the UK, which is our Teardrop's largest market, 42% of people coming from the UK state that they are visiting relatives and friends. So it's I think a big shift from sort of pre-COVID. In terms of, you know, when will we get back to pre-pandemic? I think next financial year we'll be getting close, and then the following financial year we'll be back to 2019 numbers. I think what we're doing is we're protecting our ARR. No, Suresh was talking about the ARRs earlier. You know, we have special offers, we have our early bird offers or last minute offers and things like that, but we're not reducing our rates. You know, in terms of the actual rack rates, we're confident that these are the rates that we should be charging, and if we were able to charge them back in 2019, why can't we charge them in 23 and 24? So we're holding firm on the rates, and we will continue to do so, even if that does mean that occupancy is a little bit lower than we would have liked. So I think that answers the pre-pandemic question. I think we'll get back there in a year or definitely within 2 years.
Ms. Dmitri, again, question for you is, what are the bottlenecks and key challenges Sri Lanka might face in light of increasing number of tourists, and what improvements should be made?
Yeah, so Henry also mentioned it in his first point. I think one of the main things is at the airport, the first point of arrival. Unfortunately, the efficiency in the airport is really not what we expect. Like, it's like from simple things from the immigration officers, how they welcome you, like the body language, all of these, the facilities that we have in the airport and so on. So if these can be improved, like if you look at a country like Singapore, which is probably the most efficient airport in the world, within a few minutes you can be out without any problems. So that really is a difference, and but we might obviously take a long time to get where Singapore is, but we can easily, it's just a matter of changing the people, their body language, how they welcome and all of that. Like the way like they welcome a guest or tourist who comes in, it's like you're doing them a favor by coming and showing your passport. So it's so their body language and the way they treat people, all that. If that's just one of the things, and of course with the number arrivals going up, the airport is going to be busy. So we need to ensure it works smoothly. I think not only Sri Lanka but all over the world, a lot of airports are facing shortage of staff. So even Sri Lanka has issues sometimes when we have multiple flights coming. Sometimes you have to wait over half an hour for your baggage or to come to the carousel. So all these things we need to make it efficient, but that's the first point of contact. Then secondly, with the numbers going up, like I mentioned, regarding the national parks, it's sites like Yala, Sigiriya, Kandy, which are our main attractions. But if we don't manage the visitation, and if there's over visitation, it can really damage these. If you look at all of these, we as a destination are still benefiting from all these sites built by our kings hundreds of years ago, and they're still promoting the same thing. So, but if you don't manage these sites and the wildlife parks, and if you have over visitation, that can also lead to a lot of bad publicity and so on. So it's essential that the government and all the authorities, both private and public, look at how we can, like I mentioned in my previous comment as well, spread tourism into more unknown destinations as well, where you can also then benefit those communities as well, like how in Sigiriya and so on, how and people have benefited over the years. So it's a matter of how you manage these. There are other challenges currently, as there has been a lot of people leaving the country. Our staffing issues, I think many industries are facing that. So that's also another challenge we need to get over, where a lot of our skilled, especially in the kitchen department, a lot of chefs and so on, migrated or moved on to other countries. So that has unfortunately left a issue, left a big gap in the service. So we need to come more out of these challenges. So it's a matter of how you manage these and ensure that we can sustain all this, not only for the short term, but for the next 100+ years as an industry.
And finally, to Mr. Suresh, so what are your anticipations with regard to the leisure sector, along with the expected economic revival of the country for the year 2024 and beyond?
So leisure sector will be a huge part of our economy of this country, in terms of foreign currency which generates, and it's net foreign currency that we generate, right? So there is limited outflow, and a lot of it remains within Sri Lanka being a service industry. And we were, I think, pre-Easter bombs, we had like almost $4.8 billion, and I think targets have been set to double this. So it will always be a very, very big part of it. And there's no reason why we can't get there, because number of arrivals that we talk in Sri Lanka is minute compared to the kind of, the arrivals that are there in the rest of the region. I mean, take Bali, I believe it's like 6 million arrivals, Malaysia is like 30, Thailand is like 40, and we are talking small numbers here, right? So it will be a huge potential, still massive potential for growth, and also in terms of, economic need for it, in terms of, employment generation, both direct and indirect. Also, in terms of the future, I just want to highlight the Indian market. India is going to play a huge role, being a very, very important market. In the past, we've had something like 400,000 plus arrivals, and this could go exponentially. Mind you, I think just before COVID, India had 27 million or 28 million travelers leaving India, right? I mean, not all of them for tourism, but that was the number of people who got on the flights and went home, right? And that's populations of countries put together. And last year, with all these problems, it was 8 million during COVID times, right? So that's a huge potential market. Flight connectivity out of India has improved. I believe we have something like 120 flights a week, maybe 80,000 seats, and covering most of the destinations. Sri Lankan Airlines accounts for a lot of it. And then we have Vistara, we have Indigo, we have Air India, and so on and so forth. So I think that will play a massive part of our market. Then on top of that, we'll see new markets growing. Russia has shown immense potential, though from a small base, 5-6 times what it was. And then we also see the emergence of new markets. Like, you're talking about the Eastern European markets like Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and so on and so forth, right? So new markets growing and getting access to Sri Lanka. And the connectivity is also good. I mean, from Middle East, we have almost 100,000 seats a month that's coming in. Right? So that's improved the connectivity. So it all gives good potential, and I believe there's a bright future, excellent future for the industry. Just that as my colleagues here mentioned, we got to get our fundamentals right. I think the infrastructure is very important. The marketing campaign is absolutely crucial. We've been toying with that, and for far too long we haven't been able to get the message across to the market at large. We really need to get the message out there to say Sri Lanka is what it is and what we have to offer. Very absolutely unique destination. So that is, I believe, amazing future. But there's some work to be done in putting it all together. But the potential is massive. We just can't underestimate what that can bring.
So we have a few questions that marked at box. The first one would be, could you provide insights into the current trends in the leisure sector in Sri Lanka, such as emerging types of leisure activities or unique experiences that are gaining popularity among tourists?
I think Dmitri touched on that, and maybe we can elaborate on it.
No, so definitely in the leisure side, there are a lot of the wellness and so on are things which are definitely seen. There are a lot of these niche markets coming up. Wellness tourism, wildlife, and also another segment which is also the adventure and sports tourism.
Okay.
That is another new segment coming up where actually now we have also, Jetwing has partnered with Spinner Group. They're having their Race the Pearl competition, which will be from Jaffna to basically Point Donra, Pedro to Donra within 24 hours, cycling 600 plus kilometers. And they are expecting up to over 40 participants and about 10-15 coming from overseas for this. So these type of things which are more adventure and more professional. But in addition, we are also seeing people coming on more leisure biking tours. So they do an entire tour of the country by cycle. So a van will go behind carrying the bags and whatnot, but they are cycling. So actually, at Jetwing, we have a travel now. We have one particular team which handles these type of activities. Hiking tours are becoming more popular. Camping, glamping, which probably 5-10 years ago, which was not people, unless you are real wildlife lovers, you would do it. But now more and more people are doing these. So that's definitely something new which is coming up.
Just to add to that, you mentioned hiking, but obviously the Pico Trail that has or is in the process of being launched at the moment is this 300-kilometer walking trail from Hantana all the way around through the tea plantations and the hill country back to Nurelia. 300 kilometers split into 22 stages, and it's been co-funded, I think, with the EU and USAID, providing grants and things like that. And there's, the infrastructure needs to be developed around that as well, with more loos and more cafe stops, places that you could stop and have a nice cup of tea or a tambili en route. But it could become a phenomenal part of Sri Lanka tourism. It doesn't just benefit the hotels in the area. Of course, it's meant to be. The reason they're providing these grants is it's meant to provide additional sources of income for the families and the communities in these regional or these rural areas. So I think it's a key part of what Sri Lanka should be aiming for. The wellness is definitely a major part of it, but experiences in general, whether it's cycling, hiking, the wildlife side of things. This is what Sri Lanka, and the cultural side of it, this is what Sri Lanka should be known for, not just beaches, which obviously are a great part of that as well.
So if you guys have any questions, you can still drop in the chat box. So the next question I think we have is, what role does digital technology and online platforms play in promoting and enhancing the leisure sector in Sri Lanka? And how are businesses leveraging tools to connect with tourists and improve the overall visitor experience?
Huge, right? You can see the shift towards technology, towards the OTAs, towards the last minute, the little bit of information, the reliance on information. So all of us are now adapting to that change, whether it be the adaptation of technology and the way we book and we invest, the technology that comes around it. So that's a major shift that is coming on. It's moving quietly away from the old traditional, brochure-based tourism where you make your bookings 6-8 months ahead and all that kind of thing. So people are basically, because the abundance of information that's available to people to make their own decisions, to make their own choices, to curate their own travel and all of that thing. So all organizations have ourselves, I know, embracing the digital technology. A lot of investment is going into that technology, which I think is imperative, is critical for survival.
Thank you, Suresh. There are some other questions as well, but I think you all have already answered that. I don't know if this is being repeated again. Sri Lanka is known for its rich cultural heritage and diverse landscapes. Can you share some initiatives or plans to promote lesser known destinations within the country beyond the more popular tourist hubs to distribute the benefits of tourism more evenly across the nation?
I think I touched on that with the Pico Trail, but also I know that there are talks about developing the sailing industry around Sri Lanka as well, and obviously again infrastructure is a major part of that. But if marinas can be built in select destinations, at the moment I think there are only about 10 sailboats around the entire coast.
Yes.
And it's an industry that is actually massive. And takes people totally away from the main touristic hubs, and you can sail around the north and the east to destinations that are relatively untouched. Obviously, you then probably don't go too far onto the land once you're off your boat, but it's I think a fairly major part of where Sri Lanka could go, but needs the infrastructure there to be able to do that. And I know that there are talks about that. I think there are other things like sort of golf tourism, as well as more and more golf courses open up around the country, which I think over time they will as well. They're obviously likely to be in more rural areas. And it's definitely something, I think, if we want to go from, I think 2019 or 18-19, we had 2.3 million visitors or thereabouts, arrivals into Sri Lanka. And I think, Sri Lanka can just about cope with that number without too much sort of additional development. Although, of course, Yala, Cooray get clogged up by tourists in the peak season during, at that time. I think it's imperative that we do look at more rural, underdeveloped areas as well for tourism. And I think Sri Lanka is a small enough country to be able to actually open up places. And if the hotels and the experience providers do a good job of opening something up,
So another question we have is, how would rising geopolitical tensions have an impact, especially from Western tourist arrivals?
Yes, that's something that we'll be cautious about. The world is in a funny place right now, it's quite big areas. So this could have impacts which we'll be watchful for. I mean, besides what will happen to oil prices as we go along, people who fly to the Middle East, right? Fly to the Middle East, the concerns around that, the airports and all this kind of thing. So that's basically something that we have to watch for, and has impacts, unfortunately impacts our industry, because our industry is not about commodities, it's about people who actually do travel. Then also we got the diversity in our markets now as well, right? So we are not dependent on single source markets as well. So that's one way to kind of mitigate to some degree the risks that go along with it. But it will always be a concern as to how the geopolitics plays out in the region, because of the very nature of our business.
That's about it for questions. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining in for Trailblazer, a deep dive into the tourism industry of Sri Lanka, and very big thank you to all three of you, Mr. Suresh, Mr. Henry, as well as Mr. Dmitri, for joining us. And thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next time on Trailblazer.